Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Christian. I am Ben DeBono, here to talk to you about the first 7 cantos of Canticle 3 of the Divine Comedy, Paradiso. That's right, we have made it through Inferno. We have climbed Mount Purgatory, and now all that remains is the exploration of the heavenly spheres until we reach the beatific vision at the end of the Divine Comedy. You know, there isn't a ton to recap this week in these first 7 cantos, which in and of itself might be something to discuss, but I think what might be most helpful to begin with is to talk a little bit about Paradiso itself, and especially some of the difficulties that readers might encounter with it, and maybe some of you have encountered along the way. You know, we get through Inferno okay, and it's actually kind of exciting because that's so gross, and that's so wild, and Dante's punishing everyone. It's just crazy, and then and there's certainly less of that in Purgatorio, but there's a certain amount of drama as we deal with climbing the mountain and getting our sin taken care of. And I think it's not unusual then for readers to reach this third part and feel a little bit taken aback, because gone is the vividness of hell in all of its disgusting grandeur. Gone is the upward journey through the mountain or different ledges and terraces of Purgatorio. And what we're left with is is a series of passages that are very enigmatic, very unapproachable in some ways, and that can be very difficult, I think, for readers to grasp and appreciate what's going on here. The comedian Moshe Keshner, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, has a very funny joke about Paradiso in one of his routines. Now, that's right, are comedians out there making Dante humor. So that's my type of stand-up comedy anyway, where he says that, he's talking about how, heaven just seems so boring and everything. And he said, people come to me, or used to come to me and say, Moshe, you keep claiming heaven's boring, but you got to read this Dante guy. He just goes on everything. And he said, well, I have read him. And all Paradiso is 500 pages of playing harps. His delivery is way better than mine. But, it's a funny part of his routine, where he just, describes even Dante in the great poem, The Ultimate Vision of Heaven, just seems like it's just 500 pages of people sitting around playing harps on clouds. And, well, that's not technically accurate. To my knowledge, there isn't a single harp in Paradiso. Not many clouds either, if it comes to that. The sentiment certainly is one that's understandable, that it just seems so difficult to grasp what's going on here. And I think that the first thing we have to realize is that is intentional on Dante's part. In fact, if you were paying attention, you probably noticed him acknowledge that a number of times in these first 7 cantos. To begin with, he starts off by invoking not only the muses, but Apollo as well. He's essentially saying, okay, the muses were all right for those first 2, but now that it's my job to take on Paradise and try and describe that, I need as much firepower behind me, poetically speaking, as I can possibly get. And then, he comes back to that idea a couple times. He starts out in the first canto talking about how we're moving to things that simply go beyond what humanity is able to experience and what memory is able to grasp and retain. Which is a very powerful thought if you think about it. That's the vision of Paradise. And then even in what he experiences in his journey and what he describes to us, we find out later on that even that is mediated for him, right? I don't know if you caught the passage where Beatrice says to him, well, you're seeing all these people on the different spheres, the moon and Mercury and all that. But that's really just how they appear to you so that you can understand the way that they're differentiated in heaven. And so even there, we're getting something that's mediated, that's not even within the world of the poem, presented as being accurate or at least literal in the way that the visions of hell and purgatory were presented in a more within the poetic narrative as being literal. So what do we do with that? Well, I think that we have to understand that Paradiso has to be read differently. More than anything, I think we have to remind ourselves that Dante isn't writing an action movie for us. Now, it would be overstating things to say that he was doing that with either Inferno or Purgatorio. But yet, I think in those cases, there is at least enough drama and conflict going on, or at least described, where we can kind of get caught up in that edge of your seat excitement. In Inferno, who are we going to meet in the next circle? In Purgatorio, what's going to happen when we get up the mountain and all of that. And here in Paradiso, we are drawn not so much, I would say, outside of drama. I don't think drama is being rejected, but yet we have moved beyond it into something greater. And what we've moved into is a greater place of contemplation, and a place that requires us to really not so much follow a story as be absorbed in the feelings and emotions. I wouldn't even say the images, because even the imagery becomes much more vague in Paradiso. But to be caught up and contemplate the sense of moving into something that is greater than what we are capable of experiencing. And I think part of why we struggle with a text like Paradiso is because that's not how we're used to thinking about literature, or about stories in general, right? We all understand the basic structure of a story. You have your protagonist, you have your antagonist, you have your, plot with complications and difficulties, building to a climax, all that good stuff. And you can see those narrative structures, albeit maybe in unconventional ways, in both Inferno and Purgatorio. I don't think you can see them nearly as much in Paradiso. Certainly we're building towards something. We're building towards the beatific vision. But is there really a protagonist or an antagonist? There's Dante. He's our main character. But really we've left that conflict behind. It's been resolved as Dante passed through the twin rivers at the top of Purgatorio. We leave behind the drama of the narrative. And instead we move into a place where we're called to contemplate holiness. We're called to contemplate the greatness and grandeur of God. And what I would say to those of you who maybe are struggling with this, with reading Paradiso, is that that's okay. I think it is a difficult section of a difficult poem. But then I would also say that I think part of why we tend to struggle is because we have learned to approach stories and narrative in a very narrow box. And that stories and narrative can be used for so much more than that. They can be used to help us to contemplate the greatness and grandeur of God. Stories can be used to move us into that place of meditation. And so maybe the challenge, narratively speaking, for some of us as readers is to both become better readers in the sense of appreciating a new type of stories, but also, be willing to accept a story as part of that contemplation. It's interesting even in terms of the movement of Paradiso, how different it is than that of the previous two canticles, where, we're descending in the narrative. They're literally descending, walking down the Inferno or walking up Mount Purgatory. And while there is ascent in Paradiso, it's more of this transition. It's kind of, beginning with those initial scenes where they're just flying upwards with a sense of weightlessness, and then the transition between the spheres is almost instantaneous. So much so that if you're not paying close attention to the text, you can sometimes miss it. That, oh, we just left the moon and now we're, on Mercury. Well, when did that happen? It's just so quick. It's so transcendent. And that itself, again, serves to bring us into that transcendent state. Now, if you're horribly bored with Paradiso and you just want to throw it out the window, probably nothing I said just helped. But, again, I would say that Dante, by this point, hopefully there's enough trust between us as audience and him as author that we can see he knows what he's doing. He's a great artist. And maybe we need to view this section less as a story, but more as a painting, the way you would a painting that simply takes your breath away and makes you think and feel things that you would have never thought or felt otherwise. I think that's the experience to be gained by reading Paradiso. As far as the action in this, these 7 canticles, or I should say the plot, again, very little. We move to the moon. We have where we meet Picarda, I believe her name is, and the moon is people who have broken their vows either through their own fault or through, in the case of Picarda, through somebody else's fault, where she's dragged away from the convent by violent men, which leads to long discussions about free will and everything. And all of which is serving to show us the great beauty that God has designed in heaven. That no, just because somebody like Picarda is at this lower sphere, in some ways due to no fault of her own, does that mean God is unjust or that there's a flaw in heaven? Dante wants us to ask that question. Indeed, he asks that question. The answer is by no means. Rather, this is part of God's great design. And he has a wonderful line in either Cantos 6 or 7, it must be 7, where he's talking about how, there's these layerings in Paradiso, and there's the highest, everybody from the moon all the way up to the Virgin Mary, and these different ranks and everything. And he says, well, it's just like how if you listen to a choir singing, the differences in voices come together to make, he uses the term, unequal voices create a beautiful melody that wouldn't be there otherwise, and that's what Paradiso is supposed to be for us. So I think even here, as we're, in these first few spheres, as we're contemplating the lesser souls in paradise, we're called to see how they contribute in a unique and essential way to the beauty of what God has designed in paradise. This whole, as we'll see, this is, to use Peter Leithart's phrase, this is the great dance. Everything in Paradiso revolves in perfect harmony with the divine, who will meet in the Empyrean at the very end and everything. And it's great upward ascent through this dance of beauty and harmony and wonder that draws us into greater and greater contemplation of God. And that starts here. That starts with being able to overcome our sense of, well, that's not right, because that's not how we would have done it. We wouldn't have held Picarda responsible for this broken vow. To realize that maybe God knows what he's doing, and maybe in his infinite wisdom, he's weaving something more beautiful than it could have been otherwise. And then, of course, we get the Emperor Justinian then on Mercury as we move on to the second sphere, and he relates this whole history of Rome and everything, which, man, there's a lot I'd like to talk about there. We don't necessarily have time to get into it. But the sense, again, we get Dante's complex relationship with Rome, which, if I can just maybe stray into that briefly, I think is worth thinking about for those of us in the modern world where, there's all sorts of debates, and most of them just idiotic from my perspective about what should the relationship be between Christians and politics, and people who want to align Christianity with one or the other of our two political parties here in the United States, and people who just want to create as much separation as possible between their faith and the political realm. And I don't think Dante really allows either of those choices. He draws us with his vision of Rome into something where we are forced to see the political realm as something very much within the realm of God, something very much where God is at work in. And so to those who would seek this differently, there's God's kingdom and then there's the world's kingdom, and so Christians shouldn't be patriotic, or Christians shouldn't be involved in politics or something, or Christians shouldn't try and elect candidates or pass laws that have biblical values behind them, kind of a purely separation of church and state, or it can come the other way too, that we don't want that political stuff corrupting our religion, we don't want it corrupting our faith, we don't want patriotism involved here or anything like that. And Dante would say, no, you can't do that. It's just not the way the world works. That's not reality what you're looking at. That there is this political realm, and it is real, and it is important, and things like patriotism matter, and being fiercely involved in the case of Dante with politics, or can be worthwhile endeavors. But then on the other hand, I think you'd come back, and those who want this to kind of equate the two and say Christianity is being a good Christian means being a Democrat or being a Republican or being a white or a black, to put it into Dante's political terms, or the Guelphs or the other one that I don't remember, in the different Florentine political parties that were going on. I don't think we can go that route either. That's ruled out by Dante because there's this level of corruption that's involved. So there's a lot more to be said there, but I think Dante pushes us once again when it comes to our political assessment beyond the simplistic answers that are so tempting to adopt, and that of course is part of the brilliance of what he's accomplishing here. So we have the Emperor Justinian, and then we kind of, and by the way, that Canto 6 where he speaks, that is the only canto in the entire Commedia that is a single uninterrupted monologue. So, nice little bit of trivia, I guess. I'm sure there's more significance we could extract from that than just trivia, but I don't know what it is, so I won't attempt to make it up as I go along. So that brings us then to we get to Canto 17, or not Canto 17, Canto 7, which brings us to the end of Mercury, and then in Canto 8, which is where we'll begin next time, we'll move up to Venus, which is the final one of these first three spheres where the souls there seem to have had some kind of defect in their life that's relegated them, but again, as we saw, that's part of God's essential plan. And I think then, if we're to maybe bring in an Easter reflection for, these first 7 cantos, as far as now that we're out of Lent and everything, we want to move beyond penance. I think it would be to maybe go back to not so much the content of these first 7 cantos, but maybe what we were talking about earlier with the structure of Paradise, or Paradiso, is to begin to have an appreciation for the mystical part of the faith, to begin to be people who are able to step outside of our comfort zones and be drawn into the great divine mysteries. And I think we can take comfort, or at least people like myself, who that can be hard for, and that is hard for me, because I am more of a, intellectual guy. I don't mean that to pat myself on the back, but I tend to be more intellectual, less emotional, and so that can be hard for me. But where I take comfort from these passages is that I get the sense Dante was he's a very intelligent man, and yet he wrote one of the most transcendent meditative pieces of all time. And so I think part of the challenge that needs to come into our personal lives from this isn't just the artistic appreciation we need to have in order to be good readers of a difficult text, but also to be good Christians in the sense of opening ourselves up to the divine mysteries. Opening ourselves up to things that are maybe beyond our comfort zone, maybe beyond our ability to comprehend and feel okay with. We have a big problem, I think, in our modern world of trying to make God safe and manageable and easy and accessible and everything. And the addiction we have to accessibility, whether it be in our faith or whether it be in our culture, I think is something that could kill us as a society. Not to say that there's never a time and a place to just kick back and shut your brain off with something dumb or whatever. That's fine. But yet we seem to never get out of this place of accessibility. And you look at the major movies and the things that sell, whether it's secular in the secular world or in the Christian world. What churches tend to get people lining up outside their doors. Well, it tends to be the ones that make everything very easy and accessible, and you don't have to think about all this difficult stuff, and God's your buddy and he's right here with you. And maybe there's a place for some of that, but I just can't help feeling that we are neutering the faith in a very real sense, and neutering ourselves intellectually, if we broaden it out beyond the faith to culture as a whole. And that what Dante has given us here in Paradiso as a whole is this vision of God that refuses to be safe because it refuses to conform to any of the boxes we would want to put it into. And that's something very challenging. And it's something I think we need a lot. So I guess my challenge would be that during this Easter season, and the reflection for us would be during this Easter season is a wonderful time to maybe start to move beyond that. Start to move beyond that in your faith and what you read and what you think about, and in the way that you approach God. God's not your buddy. He's your friend in a sense that God is close to you and he loves you and everything, and God cares for you in a very personal sense. But there's also this other sense where we need to realize that God is transcendent beyond anything that we can comprehend, and he's not going to fit into that box. And he's not going to be your little pal. And he doesn't, he doesn't fit into the shallowness that we like to approach our lives with in today's day and age. And Dante, if we're going to read Paradiso correctly, is going to push us out of that artistically. He's going to push us out of that box and force us to wrestle with art that's difficult and challenging in a way we're probably not used to. And so what I would hope is that we are able to also then have that spill over into our spiritual lives and move out of the shallowness that plagues us there as well. So that's what I've got for us this week. Next time, read through Canto 14 of Paradiso. We'll take on the next few spheres. I believe we even get up to the sun, where good old Thomas Aquinas is hanging out. So that'll be a fun one to read. So through Canto 14 next time. Until then, I am Ben DeBono. This is the Sci-Fi Christian. Goodbye.